This month, Russia just suffered one of the biggest blows of the entire war in Ukraine. And here's the crazy part. It didn't come from tanks, missiles, or even drones. It came from something way more unexpected: bureaucrats with spreadsheets. That's right. Europe and the UK just launched a massive strike, not with bombs, but with sanctions. And their target wasn't soldiers on the battlefield. It was Russia's secret weapon, its shadow fleet. An armada of ghost ships moving billions of dollars in oil that funds Vladimir Putin's war machine. For years, this hidden fleet has been Moscow's lifeline, slipping through loopholes, disguising itself under fake flags, and keeping Russia's economy alive. But now, the EU and the UK have dropped a sanctions bomb so big, it could strangle that lifeline once and for all. This is modern warfare without firing a single shot, a battle fought with financial weapons that hit just as hard as real ones. And if these sanctions do what they're designed to, Russia could find itself crippled, struggling to keep the lights on in its war against Ukraine. So stick with me, because in the next few minutes, I'll show you how this shadow fleet really works, why Europe just tore a hole in it, and whether this could be the move that finally breaks Russia's war economy. The offensive started on July 18th, when the European Union rolled out its 18th sanctions package, and this one was a game changer. Instead of just banning more Russian ships, Europe rewrote the rules of the oil trade with something called a dynamic oil price cap. That means the price of Russian oil isn't locked at a flat $60 anymore. It now shifts with the market. And starting September 3rd, the cap drops to $47.60 a barrel, one of the steepest cuts in years. But here's the kicker. These rules only apply to Russian oil. Norway, Canada, the United States? Totally excluded. It was a surgical strike aimed squarely at Putin's wallet. And then, just 3 days later, the UK dropped its own bombshell. British Foreign Secretary David Lammy unveiled the largest maritime sanctions package in UK history. It targeted 2 companies and 135 ships, vessels that had quietly moved millions of barrels of Russian oil since early 2024. This wasn't random. British intelligence had tracked them using advanced monitoring systems that detect when Russian tankers go dark to hide their routes. And by going after the companies behind them, the UK wasn't just slowing the ships, it was choking off the entire system that kept them running. One of those companies, Inter Shipping Services, had been registering Russian tankers under Gabonese flags, handling up to $10 billion in oil transport every year. Now, completely cut off from Western finance. Another, Latasco Middle East, a Dubai arm of Russian energy giant Lukoil, lost the services that made its massive oil operations possible. And remember, Lukoil isn't some small player. It's Russia's third largest company, operating in more than 30 countries before the war. Today, that number is almost cut in half. All of this hit right at Russia's most vulnerable moment, the peak of its winter shipping season. Meaning the pain from these sanctions isn't coming someday in the future. It's hitting Moscow right now. Russia's shadow fleet was born in 2022, right after sanctions hit. It's not just a handful of ships. It's over 1,000 aging oil tankers, 15 to 25 years old, blending into global traffic. Here's how they hide. They sail under flags of convenience, like Gabon, using fake names and paperwork. They turn off their trackers, disappearing for days at sea. They swap oil ship to ship in international waters, so Russian crude magically becomes Maltese or Gabonese oil. And since Western insurers won't touch them, they rely on shady coverage from Russia, Kazakhstan, and Kyrgyzstan. Today, that fleet accounts for nearly 17% of global oil trade, billions flowing straight into Putin's war chest. But as you'll see, the bigger this fleet gets, the more vulnerable it becomes. Here's why the shadow fleet matters. Oil and gas fund up to half of Russia's entire budget. When sanctions first hit, revenues collapsed by 40%. But thanks to this ghost fleet, Putin clawed back an extra $9.4 billion in 2024 alone, enough to cover months of war spending. But there's a catch. Shipping to Asia instead of Europe adds $10 to $15 per barrel in costs, plus weeks of extra sailing time. Multiply that by 5 million barrels a day, and you see how fast profits shrink. Meanwhile, Russia's 2025 budget shows the pressure. $142 billion, nearly 40% of all spending, is going straight into the military. That means healthcare, education, and infrastructure are being gutted just to keep the war alive. Putin may be keeping his army funded, but the rest of Russia is bleeding dry. The July sanctions hit Russia at the worst possible time, just as winter fuel exports peak. Over 444 ships are now affected, forcing longer, riskier routes and higher costs. And the new dynamic price cap is brutal. If Russia tries to cheat and raise prices, the cap simply adjusts down, creating a death spiral that makes Russian oil less and less competitive. China and India, Russia's biggest buyers, now hold all the cards, demanding bigger discounts because they know Moscow has nowhere else to go. And even China's banks are pulling back. 98% refuse direct Russian payments, fearing secondary sanctions. Combine that with Ukraine striking pipelines and refineries, and suddenly, Putin's billion-dollar shadow fleet looks a lot less unstoppable. For years, Russia's shadow fleet played hide-and-seek on the high seas. But now, technology is catching up. The UK's Nordic Warden uses satellites, thermal scans, and AI to monitor 22 key sea lanes in real time. Platforms like Windward Maritime AI can track over 1,100 dark ships, even when they switch off their trackers, by analyzing weight patterns, thermal signatures, and financial records. Russia is fighting back with tricks like GPS spoofing, fake transponders, and identity-swapping ships. But here's the problem. These countermeasures actually make them easier to spot. Every year, AI gets faster, cheaper, and harder to fool. Meaning Russia's ghost fleet is running out of shadows to hide in. For the first time, sanctions are becoming a truly global effort. The UK, EU, and G7 aren't just blacklisting ships, they're going after the middlemen who keep Russia's fleet alive. Flags of convenience? Targeted. Fake insurers? Exposed. Even India and China are quietly tightening the screws because no one wants to get caught in secondary sanctions that could lock them out of Western markets. The message is clear. If you help Russia dodge sanctions, you're next. And as this global net tightens, the shadow fleet is starting to disappear. Russia's shadow fleet once looked untouchable, thousands of tankers moving billions in oil right under the world's nose. But now, with sanctions tightening, AI surveillance expanding, and global coordination growing, the fleet is no longer a safe bet. Putin can still fund his war for now. But every voyage is riskier, every profit margin slimmer, and every sanction harder to dodge. And here's the big picture. The very system Russia built to escape the West may end up sinking under its own weight. The question isn't if the shadow fleet cracks. It's when.